Things that are closer sound louder before the audience.
When we're ready, are we ready?
Yeah, it's let's see, it's 6:06. We should probably start. We already have welcome back all of those of you who've attended our meetings in the past, and a special welcome to newcomers. For those of you who are not experienced Zoom users, if you wish to see closed captions, there's a button to click on at the bottom of your screen that says live transcript, I imagine, I think. You can move the captions by putting your cursor on the caption box and moving it. If you keep the chat box open, you will avoid the orange chat icon popping up and covering the captions. If you prefer not to see the chat, you can drag and drop it to the side of your screen. We are recording this. When the recording is ready, we will post a YouTube link on our website for others who missed it tonight. So tonight, we have composer, inventor J. Allen Zimmerman and audiologist Brad Ingro, who will discuss how the current audiogram design often causes confusion for patients. It creates stigmatizing language and prevents a full and accurate view of their entire hearing ability. Jay will demonstrate how these problems led to the creation of his new full-spectrum audiogram design, aka the hearing visualizer, that transforms the audiogram's image of a hearing loss into an easy-to-understand visual of a person's field of hearing. After reporting on the progress and response to this new system and showing viewers how to transform their own audiograms, he and Brad will discuss how this new approach may become integrated into online tech tests, assistive hearing apps, 3D virtual reality spaces, and over-the-counter devices in order to reduce stigma and improve global hearing healthcare. Jay is a composer, author, performer, inventor, speaker, installation artist, and accessibility advocate. He developed the Seeing Music visualizers with Google Creative Labs, the visual musical installation Window Music for the Hearing Health Foundation, a vibration wearable system for Not Impossible Labs, and has a patent pending on hearing visualization. After becoming deaf due to exposure from the 9/11 Twin Tower collapses, he helped develop new site plan designs with New York New Visions. He instigated WTC epidemiological studies, which proved a connection between hearing loss and 9/11 exposure, and recently shared footage of his 9/11 experience, which will be seen in documentaries on the History Channel for the 20th anniversary. Dr. Brad Ingro's first exposure to hearing loss was with his uncle Angelo, a musician who lost his hearing and career to a mastoid infection. Poor quality hearing care led his uncle to become a hearing instrument specialist in the family pharmacy, where Brad observed his unorthodox yet highly effective ways of helping patients left behind by the standard approaches of the time. After a brief stint as a sign language interpreter and mediocre success studying computer science, that's his description, he obtained a bachelor's degree in education of the speech and hearing handicap, followed by a master's in clinical doctoral degrees in audiology. Dr. Ingro is known as an early adopter of technologies, a computer geek, and an author and lecturer who makes complex topics understandable. His clinical practice encompasses the entire spectrum of audiology care, with particular focus on severe to profound hearing loss, including cochlear implants, hearing assistive technologies, hearing loss prevention, and treatment for musicians. I'm very much looking forward to hear what they say. I should tell you now that this month we are changing the procedure for asking questions because we would like to be able to see you and hear you speak. So instead of typing your question in the chat box, if you want to ask a question, please click on the Reactions tab on the bottom of the screen, then click on Raise Hand. I will then ask you to unmute yourself and you'll be able to speak. In order to give as many people an opportunity, we do request that you keep your questions to 1 minute. When you reach a minute, you will be cut off. If you need to ask a follow-up question, you will be given an additional minute. So Jay and Brad, take it away.
Okay, great. Hello. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? If so, thumbs up. All right, awesome. So we have a lot to cover, and I understand that we need to talk slow. So I thought it'd be best to start with something that requires no hearing at all. And David, that is our poll number 1. If you would please bring that up. So if you've ever had a hearing test, I'd like you to try to remember the first time you had a test and the first time that you saw your audiogram, and then choose one of these answers. So I think you can just click on one of these boxes. So it's not working for me, but hopefully it's working for you. And you can answer that while we are discussing some of these things. So the thing I was going to do is introduce myself, and John did it so beautifully. I'm not going to repeat all of that information. Just if you want to understand more about how I became deaf, the documentary on the History Channel is I Was There, and the epidemiological studies are on the World Trade Center Health Registry website if you want to read that. So obviously 9/11, okay, I can't make that poll go away. So obviously 9/11 was a really horrific way to face deafness. And then for me, all that sadness and grief was magnified by the negative way that the medical community views hearing. And so in order to keep composing, as John described to you, I tried to build music visualizations, and I designed some cool music visualizers with Google, which you can also see in my musical film Brainstorm. But all of this exploring how to visualize sound is what led to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is how to visualize hearing. The video that we're going to watch soon came out earlier this year, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive, really wonderful response, except for from a few audiologists. So that's where we have the wonderful Brad Ingrell with us tonight. So Brad, that John also described basically your background as well. Is there anything you want to add about your background before we move on?
Thanks for having me, Jay. Not really. I think he did a pretty good job. We're going to talk a little bit more about Uncle Angelo later, but I'm really excited to find out if I can understand hearing better as opposed to focusing on hearing loss. So that's what I'm hoping my conversation with Jay today will do, is help me and you understand hearing. Because all I do is talk about that stupid graph.
All right, terrific, terrific. So thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge. And as you know, and many of you know, I am also a performer. So I will apologize in advance if I get a bit dramatic with the way that I ask questions, but then you can set me straight. All right, so David, if we have the results of the poll so far, can we bring those up and see what we got? Wow, wow. Well, this is really interesting. I see a lot of people still don't understand it, and you needed a doctor to explain it. And that actually is what the IDA Institute found, is that 4 out of 5 people can't even explain their hearing ability to the family and friends. So now I'm going to walk through the video and pause after each segment. So roll clip 1. So go ahead and play the first part of the video. If we can bring that up and share your screen. Hello, I'm Jay Allen Zimmerman. Signing name, Jay. I'm a composer and musician who became deaf, which inspired me to try to create new ways to see sound. Now I'm building on this experience to create a new way to see hearing. There are nearly 8 billion people in this world with 16 billion ears, and virtually nobody understands their hearing. But we all understand their vision, right? If you can see near best, you're called nearsighted. If you can see far best, you're farsighted. If you can see 20 feet away, what the average person sees 20 feet away, you have 20/20 vision. We understand seeing better because we use clear factual terms to describe the ability you have. But for hearing, we're still using sad, ambiguous terms to describe the ability you don't have. Hearing loss, hearing impaired, hard of hearing. And the weird thing is, most of this negative language comes entirely from a graph, a visualization of the hearing data called an audiogram. Its basic framework is older than indoor plumbing, and so its design is based on the philosophy that the best way to measure hearing is by comparing it to an average. So at the top of the graph, it defines some people as normal, and then everyone else becomes mildly, moderately, severely, or profoundly abnormal. They don't say the abnormal part out loud, but that's what this comparison means. This abnormality hierarchy is not only insulting, but also confusing, because it forces all your hearing data to get completely jumbled up in a way that conflicts with your basic understanding of sound. It makes your left ear an X and your right ear an O, because the right side is for high pitch and the left side is for low pitch, because the low part is for loud and the high part is for quiet. But the true natural curve of quiet has been straightened into a line for normal in order to better show how much loss you have from normal and define you as a loser. The resulting image then is not a picture of hearing, it is a picture of a loss. And because hearing has been graphed this way for over a century, some of these pictures of loss have been given names, and that's why a doctor might say to you that you have a ski slope loss, or a cookie bite loss, or you can't hear in the speech banana. Would we tell people with glasses they can't see in a lip apple? Now it's time for a more modern system, which I'm calling the hearing visualizer. Okay, let's stop there. Great. Good job, David. Thank you. So, Brad, let's talk about all this negative language. Because personally, after September 11th, I did not want to be labeled with a loss because it kept me in a mindset of grieving. I prefer deaf. And historically, everyone with a hearing difference was called deaf until the early 1900s, right? So it looks like this concept of a hearing loss starts about the same time as when sign language became banned in schools. And they used to tie kids' hands down so they couldn't sign in order to force them to speak. And then this abnormality language appears to start when eugenics became popular, which is how the Nazis, of course, justified killing not only Jewish people and gay people, but also the disabled. So I realized that this might sound a bit extreme, but to me, this framework is not just negative, it is perpetuating systematic ableism. So why is the medical community focused on hearing loss instead of hearing ability? Could all this scary language be making people hesitant to get hearing tests in the first place? Because 80% of people who need hearing technology have nothing, and that's 350 million people worldwide.
Well, I don't think you're really being hyperbolic, Jay. We do focus nearly entirely on what you can't do. Now, there's a little bit of history behind this, and there's a little bit of logic if you come from the perception of the way we do things. So the reality is that medicine in general is trying to cure an ailment, right? So if I have a cold and I have bacteria in my sinuses, I go to the doctor and they take a swab and they go, you have this bug, here's this medicine that kills this bug. That's pretty straightforward. And when we first started to look at hearing, we really used to do something that made a lot more sense. And we'll talk about that more, I think, later. But when we began to try to formalize the measurement of hearing, we got stuck in that medical model. And so all of the people that were interested in hearing happened to wear white coats, and they happened to be in that idea that you're either behave a certain way, which is the way that people who don't have a problem behave, or you behave in a way that is different than that. And because everything was happening inside those buildings where the white coat people were, we kind of got stuck in that model. And the first time we, as a profession, kind of stood up was after World War II. I mean, hearing technology has been around for a long time, ear trumpets, vacuum, all that stuff. But when we started to really measure it was when the soldiers and sailors and Marines came back from World War II. And because they were in the medical system of the Army at Walter Reed Hospital, we kind of already had those blinders on. And we really just looked at that veteran coming in and, oh, look, he only has one arm and he has two toes left and something's up with his ears. So when we tried to help these people, we needed a way to say, what is your function now? And what is your function at the end of this rehabilitation? And I think somewhere along the line, we kind of took a wrong turn and we began to use language that really defines that entire person, as you say, by what they don't have. We created a bunch of people who hear differently than they used to hear, but we put hearing loss or hearing impairment as the primary descriptor of them. And so I look at this and I think about my uncle, and my uncle had to stop playing music professionally, but he didn't really stop playing music. And by redefining his musical space to what he could do, he was able to keep music in his life. I hope that at some point I can, as an audiologist, stop being stuck in this tunnel vision. Because right now, we're only able to talk about, as you say, you know, is it a cookie? Is it a banana? Is it a ski slope? And none of that describes you, and none of that describes your hearing.
Right. So it sounds like, I mean, the thing that you're talking about getting stuck in is basically the medical pathology model. And pathology is like a disease. So it's about saying you have a disease. And then, like you're saying, when you're working with World War II, people coming back, it's trying to figure out how much diseased are you? And that means comparing you to what we would call a normal.
Yeah, and
But
I think
research that created this, right? But what?
Yeah.
It's
So
about
I think
100 years old, right?
Yeah, right. And I think the other problem is it forces us to look at a person who doesn't hear the way they used to hear as less than they used to be. And so it's not just a disease model, but it's a less than model. And I'm to the point in my career where I would like to have a different way to talk to you about your hearing, but all I have is that graph.
Okay, well, great. Well, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm hoping that I can give you something better to use. And because I felt like, 100 years of this model is really long enough. And I wanted to flip the paradigm to switch the focus from loss to ability. But after all this work that I did, creating visual music and working with Google, I have learned that really the only way to make an effective visualization is to make sure you have very clear baselines and that you have a framework that aligns with the way that people are already thinking. So I decided to go searching for some scientific truths that I could use as a framework and a baseline to create these visualizations. So let's roll clip 2, which exposed what truths did I find. A method that is more inclusive and promotes successful outcomes by being focused not on loss, but on ability. One that combines computer accuracy with simple scientific truths. Because in truth, there is no normal, but there is a shared reality. And one thing all humans share is how our bodies react to intense sound waves. Intense sound waves can cause discomfort, pain, eruption, and ultimately death, even if you hear no sound at all. Truth 1. Too loud is the same for everybody. So if we look at how the full spectrum of sound waves affect humans, too loud is generally a straight line that is common for all, and too quiet is generally a curved line that is different for all. So if you turn the curve of quiet into a straight line, you just turn the straight line of too loud into a curve. So the straight line of loud is restored and visually intersecting with your ears. To warn everybody, this is dangerously loud no matter what you hear. Let's stop there. Great. Good job, David. Thank you. So let's talk about this concept of too loud. So Brad, I am so deaf. I can be walking down the street and suddenly I will have to grab my ears in pain. And then I will look and see, oh, it was a fire engine. So the volume or loudness of this siren hurt my ears physically, but I still couldn't hear it. So how loud is too loud? I have looked up in the CDC and the FAA and lots of entities like this, and they have all these recommendations. And what they say is that basically eardrum rupture can happen around 160 decibels. And that an ear damaging gun blast is about 140 decibels. A really loud, dangerously loud rock concert is 120 decibels. And the loudest volume that the CIA can use for sound torture is 80 decibels. So when I went back to the audiogram to try to draw these dangerously loud things, I couldn't, because the audiogram doesn't use any of the decibels in these warnings. It uses a thing called hearing level decibels. And so it appears that those hearing level decibels are basically just bonus decibel numbers that have been added to create that straight line of normal. So Brad, where is too loud? What is too loud? Where is it on an audiogram? Can you graph it in hearing level decibels? And are hearing aids that can make sound later that louder than 80 decibels, are they torturing us like the CIA?
Well, I hope they're not torturing you. You know, you bring up a very, very important point, Jay. Sound is the movement of air molecules in a pattern. So if we have a very low frequency sound, the air molecules are moving in a very slow pattern. If we have a high frequency sound, they're moving very quickly. But the intensity of sound is how much force is being pushed on those air molecules. And if a siren goes by, a fire truck with a siren goes by you, the siren is generating sound energy whether you hear it or not. And those molecules that are right next to your eardrum are being smashed by the adjacent molecules, which are being smashed by the ones next to them. And eventually we go, and the siren on that fire engine has slammed that air molecule chain in a very, very hard punch. So it's kind of like saying the invisible man walked up to you and punched you in the ear. You didn't see him, but boy, did it hurt, right? And so sound pressure level is a physical experience, and hearing is a perception of that physical experience. And so the audiogram, unfortunately, is a representation of the perception of sound. It is not the measurement of sound. So sound pressure level, our bodies, our ears, our auditory system is not as sensitive to different pitches at the same sound pressure level, which is why that I can barely hear it is a curve. However, when we get to that point where the body is saying enough is enough, stop punching me in the face, that's a straight line. Now the audiogram is turned around and it's made so that it looks easy for me as an audiologist to see patterns with. However, we have to be realistic and we have to be honest that we also made that graph so that it fit the tools that we had at the time to measure. We couldn't make earphones at that time that could create so much sound that it would hurt you. Plus, we also don't want to hurt people. They don't come to my office so I can beat you up, right? But we also at the time early couldn't make hearing aids that could make really loud sounds. And microphones weren't sensitive enough to hear really, really soft sounds and make those. So what we kind of came up with was, this is the best we can do right now in the 1930s, give or take. And so we began to use that structure. And unfortunately, we never really went back and looked at it and said, is this good enough? Now, when the hearing aid companies came along, they said, yeah, it's good enough. We can work with that because we have the same technical limitations that you have to test hearing. We have the same limitations to produce amplified hearing. So everything about how we measure hearing and how we represent hearing is really not what's happening in the physics of it. That would be sound pressure level. It's a perception that is also cheated so that it fits into what we can actually do about it. Because we don't really like to say, hey, Jay, you can hear these really low pitches, but they're not really loud enough. However, I can't build a hearing aid that's good enough to give you an 80 hertz sound. So I'm just going to pretend that that's not important. And I'm going to move my starting point over to where I can build something. Now, the reality is that that system works for some people, probably around 20% of those people, which, if I remember your earlier comment, is a number of people who actually use hearing aids. What about the 80% of those people? So I don't know. I'm one of these guys who, after 30 years, is okay saying to a guy like you, I don't know, Jay, tell me what's better. How do we make this better?
Okay, I will. So I think that's really fascinating and gratifying to hear that actually the threshold of pain is constant for all. And I think what you've told me before, research says that's about 120 decibels, 130 decibels, give or take. So also historically, well, I dug up every audiogram I could find throughout history, and I found that really all the audiograms before the 1950s and 1960s, they used the real thing. They used sound pressure decibels. And so what I guess I'm saying is, well, let's go back to that. Because as you say, as you explained to me, that is the reality of what's happening inside of the ear canal. And if hearing levels were created solely to be able to compare your perception of sound against the perception of sound by another person, which as I understand it, it was actually young people who had good hearing, then that means that the audiogram is not just ableist, but also ageist too. So I feel for an effective, accurate visualization, we should graph reality first. That's the sound pressure level. And then we can put our perception on top of that. So the next issue was, what is the best way to graph each person's perception of quiet? And so here is the truth that I used for that. Roll clip. Truth 2. Things that are closer sound louder. Before the audiogram, doctors tested and measured hearing volumes in terms of distance, writing down how far you can hear. 6 feet, 12 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. So loud is shown right where you are, and too quiet is shown far away from you. And the distance between too loud and too quiet shows if you are far hearing or near hearing. Truth. Right, let's stop there. Okay, so now we can talk about what happens in between our perception of loud and our perception of quiet. In music, we call these changes in volume dynamics. For hearing, I think we call it dynamic range, right? And I really love finding, like that clip that I'm showing you there, of conversation at 20 feet, 30 feet. Those are from actual records of doctors, the very earliest hearing doctors. And I find that the way they described dynamic range as a physical distance was just so great because it's so easy to understand. So for example, if we could show you that you can hear a car 100 feet away, then you would quickly understand that you have what I would call far hearing, and you have a wide dynamic range. And as the car comes closer, every 10 feet or so, you're gonna experience increasing loudness. But if you don't hear the car until it's 5 feet away, you would understand, wow, I have a really narrow dynamic range, and maybe I need to get some help if I don't want to be hit by a car. So why did audiologists change the system? Why did they stop measuring by distance? Can we calculate how far a person can hear in physical space? And do hearing aids use dynamic range? How do they use dynamic range to adjust for each person's perception?
Yes, no, and maybe. How's that for an answer? You know, the car is an interesting example because when these kinds of measurements were made, there was one basic kind of an engine. It was a little 4-cylinder carbureted internal combustion engine, and it had a certain kind of an exhaust system. And even though the Henry Ford and a couple other people made cars, a car was kind of a car. Have you ever been walking down the street and a Tesla pulls up next to you? They're completely silent. Hybrids are silent under 30 miles an hour, and then they make a little noise. And if you live in California, all cars are very quiet because of emission controls. But if you live in Florida, everybody takes their mufflers off and they flex their muscles on how loud their car can be. So I think the reason we got away from that is because more and more people were starting to get their hearing evaluated, and we needed a standard so that we could somehow determine what was going on. And the hearing aids needed to have some standardized measure of sound pressure level that you could hear so that they could decide how much gain or how much they needed to add to it to make certain sounds like speech at 3 feet. And it's interesting that you talk about distance. We don't talk about it overtly, but everything that we do with hearing aids in the lab, in the specifications, is measured at 1 meter. So we are doing hearing at distance for speech. And so what we're doing is we're trying to make a 60 decibel sound pressure level average speech signal audible close at 3 feet. So we have this built into our system. We just don't really talk about it. And that's one of the reasons why I always say to people, hearing aids are great as long as you can reach out and shake the person's hand. But beyond that, they begin to lose their effectiveness very quickly. So I feel like we got away from it for the purposes of trying to do better measurements, but in the process, we really confuse the situation. So it's harder to understand your hearing. And I agree that to say I'm nearsighted, I'm farsighted, everybody knows what that means. To say I'm hard of hearing, that's a range from mild to profound. Nobody knows what that means. I think the other problem that our system provides is it makes it easy for me to make some decisions about what kind of sound is important and what kind of sound isn't important. And particularly with musicians, that dynamic range can be artificially shortened by the manufacturer's desire for you not to say, "Ooh, that's a little loud. I think I'll return this hearing aid and get my money back." So there's a lot of business policies built into this so that we're not really giving people the maximum exposure and the maximum opportunity to hear the world. We're making a whole bunch of decisions about where the start should be and the stop should be. And again, I think part of it has to do with we're basing everything on assumptions that were driven by technological limitations almost 100 years ago. And everything in our life that's technological has vastly changed, improved, expanded since then. However, hearing has not. So we have a little bit of a fuzziness when it comes to that uncomfortable thing. Because, and this gets to why does the audiogram not go down any farther? Even though the physical point at which you say, "Ow, I feel that fire engine," is about the same for everybody, we perceive not pain, but "I don't like it" discomfort at different levels. And so that's a little curvy of a line, but the hearing aids, again, are built so that we don't beat up people, we don't torture people, but really all of those arbitrary limits of how small of a world of sound we're willing to give you has more to do with keeping the hearing aid from being returned for credit because it was a little unpleasant sounding than it is to protect you from anything that's really going to hurt you.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense that you would have defaults to protect people and also for people who don't really understand or want to deal with a lot of the details. But technology has changed, so we have advanced options on pretty much everything now. We have advanced settings for our phones, for websites. Right. So there's no reason why they couldn't add some advanced setting options so that people who have unique hearing, like me, could have a little more choice and control over what we want. So the last segment, when you talk about options and limiting things, this is the part that really limits me and upset me the most. So let's take a look at the next truth, which I feel all audiologists should understand. 3, all hearing is important. The other thing all humans share is music. It is a unique human experience embedded into all the rituals of life. But because the audiogram came into existence with the invention of the telephone, it still limits its view to only those tones that are needed to transmit speech over copper wire. The range of tones shown is so limited that the very highest and lowest sounds are left out, including the entire lower half of a piano. The entire full spectrum of human hearing is shown and displayed in alignment with how we think about sound, with the low sound shown low and the high sounds high, and the tones most commonly heard in speech in the mouth area. No more speech banana. And the full spectrum is divided into 3 easy to understand sections: the bass, the treble, and the high end, where we find all those sounds that are too high for our vocal cords to produce. Truthful. So we can stop there. Thank you. So if anybody at home, if you have your audiogram or you remember what your audiogram has on it, if you want to try to transform this yourself, very roughly, the first thing that you would do is you would take your audiogram and rotate it to the left. And then imagine yourself standing where that too loud is, roughly around 120 decibels, and looking towards too quiet, usually around 0 decibels. And that would give you sort of a side view of your hearing to see if you're far hearing or near hearing. And if you rotate it to the left, you will also accomplish what we just talked about here, which is that the high frequencies will end up in the high part of the chart. And if you want to see if your audiogram is showing you what I call full spectrum hearing, full 20/20 hearing, which is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, then you will look and see if those frequency numbers are on your audiogram. They're probably not. If it's limited like mine, where it stops at 250 hertz, then that means that you're missing out a lot. You're missing out a lot of music, and you're missing out on male voices. So I guess I could say that audiograms are not just ableist and ageist, but sexist too. So let's talk now about these frequencies ranges and these frequency spectrums. Brad, over the years, I have tried so many hearing aids, and they have never helped me hear anything. And I discovered that because most of my ability does not even appear on the audiogram. And even when I asked the manufacturer, can you make a hearing aid that is as good as this phone app and these cheap earbuds? And they said, no. And when I asked audiologists, will you please at least test me below 250 hertz, which is just middle C on a piano, so I can know what I hear down there, they also said no, because their machine doesn't do that. And then I was told about frequency transposition hearing aids to supposedly move sounds lower, but I found out what they considered to be low was really high, like a soprano's high C. So please tell us, why does the audiogram cut off the bass and force audiologists to call high sounds low? Why can I buy amazing musician in-ear monitors that have way more range than full spectrum, even beyond 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, for only $30 for a pair, and yet hearing aids and cochlear implants can't do this?
Well, I agree with all of your assumptions about the ists. They're ableist, they're sexist, they're this, they're that. First of all, every audiometer that's what's called a clinical audiometer should be able to go to at least 125 hertz and up to 8,000 hertz. So I'm not sure what machines these audiologists are using, but they probably pay too much for it if they don't have that last octave on the left. But again, you touched on it earlier, copper wire and telephones. So unfortunately, the first technology that resembled a hearing aid was a radio with vacuum tubes and the telephone. And what we found was it was very expensive to create high fidelity on the telephone when you were using a copper wire. And so in order to provide a really wide spectrum, like a CD quality sound with a copper wire, you need a big chunky wire. And that was very expensive. And so as they started to look at making telephones accessible to more than just the very, very rich, and they looked at sending those signals over longer and longer distances, they started to say, how good does it really have to be? And so again, using a bunch of people who had probably pretty good far hearing, who were pretty young, they figured out that if we kept moving it in and in and in and in and in, we still didn't lose any quality. But then when we hit about 300 hertz to 3,000 hertz, the majority of people said, I don't understand it anymore. It's turning into mush. So that was the range. Now, if you ever listen to a speech signal and then chop it down to there, it sounds very much like a bad recording. It's really terrible. It's horrible, but it's good enough for a person with average hearing to put the pieces together. And so this concept of as long as you can hear most of speech, and in fact, you only really need to hear 86% of the sound energy of a speech signal to score a 100% on that terrible test. Say the word car, say the word jar. So that became our good enough is good enough. And yes, a hearing aid company could build you a device that would give you those low frequencies, but it would be big and it would be quote unquote ugly. So they don't want to build that. They don't want to put their name on something that might look unattractive. And they could do the same thing on the high end, but because it will cost them money to develop a new way of thinking for something that's not the average, that most people don't need, they're not going to invest in it because remember, they're only hitting 20% of the potential market. Now, if more people started to look at hearing and devices that are attached to your hearing as enhancements of ability rather than corrections for disability, we very well might spur on some innovations. And I agree with you, for a couple $100, I bought a pair of in-the-ear monitors that I use when I play music, and they have a 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz range. They're so good that I have to put a damper in them so I don't damage my hearing. That's how good they are. And yet the hearing aids sound like tin cans. So I don't know that going at it from the, hey, audiology, fix this problem. Hey, hearing aid companies, fix this problem. I don't know that we're going to fix that problem. I think we need a different approach. I think we need a different way. But I will be honest with you, even though there's a lot of things out there that could do better in the world of, I don't know, pro audio or consumer electronics, without throwing my colleagues under the bus, in audiology, we get very little training in technology outside of hearing aids. So we don't understand what an in-the-ear monitor is. We don't understand what this little remote microphone is that I use because it uses Bluetooth low energy, and most audiologists go, who, what, where? Not because we're stupid, but because our world has been artificially narrowed and we can only offer you what's available, not what's possible. And that's the biggest limitation of audiology, is everything that we have as a treatment is offered up by 6 companies. And that's it. So again, I don't have an answer for you, Jay. I have a question. Help. How do we do this? Where are the solutions? If you come to my office, I'm going to have to say, I'm sorry, Jay, I don't have anything for you. But maybe you have something for me.
Yes, well, I think that the big takeaway for me is that I feel that listening, if I'm going to put my time and energy into listening when I'm basically profoundly deaf, I think it should be relaxing and fun and not painful and exhausting. And it's my belief that we can only accomplish that by including all the warm, low frequencies that give humans pleasing vibrations, because the sound waves are so low. And the sound waves are so large. A really, really low sound wave could be like 16 feet long. And these in-ear monitors I have, forget 20 hertz, they go all the way down to 5 hertz. And you can get them to go all the way up to 40,000 hertz. So you can be perceiving and feeling those vibrations of things that you can't hear, but impact you physically, as you explained earlier. And the additional thing in terms of solutions, this is where I would like things to change, because I think you told me before, all this research, a lot of it is incredibly old. And maybe they had really bad microphones when they were trying to figure out where is speech when they were working with copper wire. And when I started visualizing music, we all started visualizing speech using the apps that I built with Google. And what I saw is that, yes, the primary frequencies of those really soft, quiet sounds, those S's and T's and P's, the primary frequency is very, very high. But they are usually accompanied by undertones and noise artifacts, which are significantly lower. So I feel that the assumption that you can only hear a speech by using those super high sounds is not quite true. So thank you so much for this information. This is fabulous. I know our time is running out, so I want to get on to the next few truths and our future. So the next truth that I'm using for the hearing visualizer in order to transform the audiogram is so obvious, I don't even need to set it up. So let's play this last truth. 4, we hear in stereo. We don't have to stay trapped in this side view. The confusion of layered data can be eliminated by separating and mirroring the data for your other ear. This creates a widescreen view of your entire field of hearing. Seeing all your hearing data as a hearing field shape helps you understand your abilities quickly. The average person, previously graphed as a straight line normal, now sees a far hearing field that's wide and open. A person with a ski slope loss now sees a shape like a cave, which shows an ability focused on the base. A reverse ski slope loss now shows a shape like a valley, which shows an ability focused on the high end. A deaf person like me, previously graphed as severely or profoundly abnormal, now sees a very near hearing field that's narrow. But remember, hearing doesn't happen with just your ears. So we can also begin to graft your sensitivity to sound waves through touch and feeling. So we'll pause there for a second, but because of our time, I'm going to make this short and then combine our questions, Brad, into the future segment. So I just want to express to you that the first time that I smashed my audiogram together on the too loud line and looked at it this way, it just blew my mind, because suddenly I could see my hearing as a physical space around me, and it just made so much sense. So let's go on to now about the future. I'll play the future segment, and then I will follow up with some questions. So roll the next clip, please. In fact, once your data is imported, we can do anything. We can layer multiple hearing fields to show how your hearing has changed over time. Layer the potential benefits of hearing technology. Use scientific formulas for sound decay to show, for example, how far away your phone can be if you want to hear it ring. This is just the beginning. No more negativity, no more confusion, no more defining people in levels of abnormality. Because in the hearing visualizer, your left ear is left and your right ear is right. High sounds are high, low sounds are low. Too loud is too close, too quiet is far. Volumes represent actual sound wave intensities, and the full spectrum of human hearing is shown, including every note on the piano. I want all 8 billion of us to understand our 16 billion ears, to make the best use of our hearing fields when choosing cell phones and headphones long before needing any assistive hearing technology or implants. Because the truth is, eventually everyone needs some hearing assistance. That's normal. Right, thank you. So that's the end of the video. And I want to follow up with some questions and a couple more polls, and then turn it over to the Q&A segment. So just quickly, for everybody out there who has ever lived with an audiogram, if you want to understand the basics of how you can transform it, just use your imagination here. If you remember those X's and O lines for your hearing ability, and they are horizontal, imagine rotating them out this way so they're on either side of you. And that will give you basically a sense of how far hearing or near hearing you are. If they're at the top, you're going to be very far hearing. If they're near the bottom like me, they're going to be very near hearing. And then if they had some sort of shape, if they had a cookie bite or a ski slope, those shapes will be transformed to reveal basically what is your frequency focus. So mine, which was a ski slope to nowhere, now it shows that I have a focus on the bass frequencies. If you had a cookie bite, once we transform those into sound pressure level decibels, it actually might end up being more straight because the natural curve of average hearing is a curve rather than a straight line. So Brad, let's talk about the future. Oh, I'm sorry. First, I need to do this poll. So let's bring up the next poll about hearing ability. Now that I've explained the basic premise of how you could transform your audiogram, David, if you'd bring this up, I understand after this talk, I understand my hearing ability, not my hearing loss, better than I did before. Oh, so I'm seeing this coming in real time as people answer. That's really amazing. Wow, wow, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm so excited that the vast majority are understanding your hearing better. And for those who are not understanding your hearing better, I'm very sorry, and maybe you will be able to give us a clue as to what we can do to help you. So while we're, the next thing is, let's talk about this future. So the first part, Brad, is do we think that audiologists could adjust to a new system? Could they give up the X's and O's? Could they talk about hearing in a positive way? Because this might be able to eliminate a lot of stigma. Could they give us options in how we view our hearing data? Just export the data to us freely so we could bring it up in the hearing visualizer. And then once we've gotten over those couple of hurdles, what can we do to improve hearing health results? Oh, I'm sorry, someone said you didn't see the poll results. I guess I was seeing them automatically. Or does everyone see that now? So it looks like out of the people who took the quiz, the poll, the vast majority do feel like they understand the hearing better. And for those of you who didn't, then please let us know what was confusing to you so we can make that better and clearer for you. So this, okay, it keeps popping up. Anyway, to recap, Brad, do you think the audiologists can adjust to some sort of a new system and give us a little more freedom and control? And then what can we do to expand access and expand options for the 80% of people who have nothing? Is that going to be remote testing? Is it going to be building more apps into phones, more consumer electronics? What can we do to normalize hearing healthcare so that from cradle to elder care, you understand your hearing and you can be proactive in how to best use your ability?
I do think that it can happen. I will say that with a very cautious optimism, because within the sort of traditional hearing care model, everything is entrenched and controlled by the hearing aid manufacturers. In fact, the people who make hearing testing technology, those audiometers, those companies are now all owned by companies who own hearing aids. And so that's become a very small closed loop. That's that 20% of people who come to my office to get their hearing care. I believe that it can change, but it will change, as you suggested, in the consumer electronics space, in the ability technology space, in the healthable space, in the spaces that are designed to enhance quality of life rather than to correct for deficit. And when that 80% of those people who don't ever come to my office start to understand their hearing and start to interact with those enabling technologies to enhance their experience with sound, all sound, not just my little speech banana, when that starts to happen, that will create market interest and pressure for audiology to say, hey, I want some of that. I'm the expert in hearing. Maybe I need to understand this other way of looking at hearing. So I do believe that it can happen. There will be a lot of pushback. There will be a lot of sort of trying to figure out which people belong in which of those spaces. But I do believe it can happen. I think that the upcoming legislation about direct-to-consumer products and over-the-counter hearing aids will help that. But I will say, and I love talking to HLAA groups, you all will make that happen, not me. I am going to follow your lead as a person who wants to be engaged in your hearing and your hearing care. And if you can show me a better way to understand your hearing, if you understand it better, I probably understand it better. And if you can enlighten me on some enabling technologies where you can take your little hearing space and you can decorate it the way that you want to decorate it, and you can feel comfortable and supported and loved in the world of sound that is available to you, and then you can use some technologies that I may have never heard of to enhance that, then I can come along and join you. I've always forced you to come to my world and put you in literally a big metal box. And when I put you in the big metal box, then I put 1930s World War II airplane headphones on you and say, push a button when you think you hear something in the midst of all of your tinnitus. And I'm going to call that your hearing. It's time for you to remind me that the box is only one of many descriptors of hearing ability. And when we can get out of the box and we can do your hearing assessment in your own home, then my field, I believe, who is full of good people, will start to come around. But we're not going to do it on our own. We're creatures of habit. It's very comfortable in the box. And moving into a new apartment or a new neighborhood is scary. So you're inviting me to your new neighborhood of better hearing, better understanding, and customized spaces. And I've been living in Levittown, New Jersey, where every house is exactly the same for 80 years. You got to give me a little time to get used to it. And you have to invite me over a few times so I can visit before I have to sell my house and move in.
Oh, hello, sorry, okay. Suddenly I made everybody deaf like me. So I think that is really terrific, Brad. I think your point you're making is so true. I mean, what a great group to actually be saying this to, because if anything I've learned about HLAA over the years is we are all incredibly involved in our hearing and being proactive and taking control over some of these things. So this is what our last bullet is going to be related to, is what are you willing to do to help change this world? Because I'm very much involved in trying to develop new methodology for testing, where we have more freedom, remote apps, spreading this all over the world. But I think it is going to take us, it's going to take all of you getting involved. So what are you willing to do? I mean, I think it's a baby step or would you be willing to just check yourself when you start to describe yourself, your hearing in a negative way, and use a better word? Encourage your doctors to use better words. So let's show this poll up here. So these are some of the ideas. You can use better words, hearing ability or hearing difference instead of hearing loss. You could start to think of your hearing as an ability instead of an abnormality. So what do you hear best? Things that are close, things that are loud, things that are low. And then also in terms of viewing your hearing as a hearing field. Do you want to try to understand how far you hear and what things you want to bring into the space? And then ultimately, we will be able to develop products. You go to the store, you'll scan a new device, and you'll instantly be able to bring it up and layer it on the visualization of your hearing and know what kind of things how it's going to benefit you. So let's go ahead, and if everyone has kind of answered that, we'll go ahead and bring up the results of the poll for everybody. Do you need some more time? So David, you can just decide when you think it's ready. Oh, yay, let's do the deaf sign for applause. This is the deaf sign for applause. I'm so happy to hear. Majority of you are willing to do all of the above, and then many of you are willing to take some steps. And so I think we could get an action plan together so that we can take those steps and make it really happen. So I guess now we're going to turn to audience Q&A. And David, are you running the Q&A, or John, whoever is running the Q&A, you can take over. Thank you very much for listening.
Jay, I think I'm running it, although I'd be happy to see that to David, who may be better skills at this than I do. There was a terrific presentation, and I think the poll that showed that 82% now understand their hearing better than they did before is a testament to what a great job you guys did, Jay and Brad. We do have time for a few questions. I am new at doing this procedure. We've been doing it differently in the past, so I apologize in advance if I'm not quite up to speed on it. So there is a David.
Can I ask? Yes, you call out the people, you handle it, and I'll do the Zoom backend, and we'll work together.
You'll hand, okay, and I will keep the timing. So if you want to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions. Click on that, and then within the reactions, you can raise your hand. And I see that, and you will each have a minute to ask your question. You will be muted at the end of the minute. And then you'll have, if you need a follow-up question, you can ask, hey, you'll have another minute. Catherine Boughton has raised her hand.
And I'm unmuted. Yes, Jay, these negative reactions you've gotten from audiologists, Brad explained that to some extent. But I want to know, have you been invited to present this at audiology meetings? Or have you tried to talk to groups the way you're talking to us?
Okay, so I guess I'll answer that. So no, I've not been talking to audiology groups. I've been busy trying to get to Broadway with my musicals. So I would need some help here to figure out who should I be talking to, who should I take it to. Obviously, we can share the video, so the video has been shared with a lot of different people, but I would be happy to talk to anybody who wants to listen to me and consider all the reactions. You know, if a doctor tells me, hey, I really need to see the data layered, then it's like, okay, you can have that option. So yes, I'm totally open to it.
I would say that it's a little premature to go to that group, Catherine, because they are skeptical in general of anything new. And there's a lot of current fear that over-the-counter is going to erode their customer base. So what I would recommend is eventually, yes, that we go and do this to that group, but I'd like to have a little bit more, some more stuff some more arrows in our quiver in terms of some data and some more reactions from end users, so that when they inevitably say, yeah, but, we're going to be able to say yes, and show them that this is really not a threat, but it's an opportunity and it's a strength. And they've all been on 2-year hiatus anyway because they're of COVID. So they're just getting back to their conferences, and they're all trying to not get COVID right now. So I think we're on the same page, but it's going to take a little time.
Thank you. Sam McPherson, unmute yourself, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Jay, thanks very much for your presentation. It was, really eye-opening and ear-opening for me. I'm a musician. You mentioned some technology, these earbuds with a much wider range, and I was just wondering if there was a resource that I could get to, where you give me a list of equipment I need to be able to go to. I play in an orchestra, I play in small groups. I was just really, interested in the specifics of the kind of things that I could use aside from my hearing aids, which are not sufficient to capture the whole range of sound. So I'd appreciate any, links or anything you could provide that would help me out with that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, maybe some of the people here at HLAA can do an email exchange so we can talk. I don't currently have a list of what these tech options are, but like the ones I bought, they were just on Amazon. And I think the first thing to do is understand your own hearing. So if you know what frequencies you want, this is how I do it. As I go and I say, I want to have these frequency ranges. And then I go and I check and I read, you have to read all the specs. So if it's an in-ear monitor, what is the frequency range? What is their dynamic range? How many decibels can they do? And that's where I think the hearing visualizer will be beneficial. So I wanted them very loud and I wanted them all the way down to 5 Hertz, and then find something that fits my budget. If you want to go beyond that and you want to actually use these sort of things to hear live sound, so something like an in-ear monitor is going to be great for recording, or something like this where the sound is already being produced and we're using the mics from other things. But if you have to have the mic, then you also get into the specifications of what can the mic pick up. And that's where I get frustrated with hearing aids. Once I try to dive into the specs, what kind of mic is it? What is the frequency response of those mics? And they're not what I want or what can help me. So I would say we want to look at all those things. A lot of people who are musicians, Richard Einhorn, I'm sure could tell you all what are the very best things right now in terms of the microphones that work with your apps. Me, I am still struggling to get a good app. I had an amazing app that Richard put me onto about 10 years ago, and it was the best app ever. And then the company went out of business and no one has been able to make anything as good as that. And I keep trying to get old iPhones and downloading it onto old iPhones. The phones themselves will have really great mics. A lot of them have wonderful mics and they have multiple mics. So this is what made that app so great, is that it could actually use those multiple mics to zoom in on what I wanted to hear. And I am trying to encourage all the major tech companies to build this stuff into their phones. So fingers crossed that they will actually, because the phones can already do it, but people are not making the apps and they are not allowing people to make the apps that can do it. The phone has the capability. And so help me with that. Okay, Brad has some comments.
So Sam, the other big thing for working with capturing more sound in a live playing environment is it really will require that ensemble is mic'd as if they were making a digital recording. And then if you can find an earphone that represents the spectrum that you need, and the sound engineer can mic that ensemble to get all of that sound, then you simply need a monitor feed out of the soundboard into your preferred earphone, and you'll hear everything. Get with us offline. There's a company in Chicago that makes some really good in-the-ear monitors that have some additional ways that you can also hear ambient sound while also hearing through the monitor. So we'll do that offline so we don't take too much time.
Thank you. Jerry Bergman, I think you're up next.
Thank you, John. Great presentation. I have a question for Jay and also a question for Brad. And Brad, it's good to see you. We met first about 9 years ago in Denver at a
Yep.
technology workshop that HLA ran. So nice to see you again. Jay, my question is, given the current limitations of the audiology exam, can the results of the audiogram be presented today if the audiologist wanted to map them using your approach to an audiogram with the same results? And Brad, my question for you is, I've had a severe ski slope hearing loss in the high frequencies, and I now have 2 cochlear implants. Is my limitation in terms of the frequency ranges comparable or worse because I'm now dependent on the implant for my frequencies?
Okay, so I guess I will go first and then Brad, turn it over to you. So if I'm understanding your first question, Jaren, about whether or not the audiologist could use this system with what they have, absolutely. Which is going to be the data that comes from the audiometer, and we're just displaying in a different manner. So it just needs to be built into the system, or you need to export the data, and then we can put it into this new format and you can see it. However, the thing that I would want to point out is if we wanted to fully use what I'm imagining for the hearing visualizer, Brad will correct me if I'm wrong, but the current setup is not to test you on every frequency. In hearing levels, if we're still doing hearing levels, those are only added to very specific frequencies at about 10. There is no algorithm that can convert sound pressure into hearing levels because they are not based on math. They're just like taking this is the equal loudness and then you're adding this on top in order to make a straight line for 0. So that's kind of the first hurdle is getting them away from hearing level decibels. Brad, did I get any of that right?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I mean, there's essentially when they calibrate an audiometer, they have a series of conversion tables, and those conversion tables allow people to adjust the output so that 90 decibels hearing level follows the equal loudness contour of sound pressure level. So the dial says 90, but the output is actually 108 or 104, depending on the frequency. So that's not a mathematical thing. It's just a point by point. We tested it, we figured it out, and it's just a reference chart that the technician uses. In terms of your ability to hear different pitches, it is, unfortunately, Jerry, hardwired into the cochlear implant. There is some ability with some implants to get a slightly better perceptual granularity between the electrode points, but there's a start and a stop. And so again, because we're looking at primarily a speech focus, there's somewhere between around 180 to 200 hertz up to 6,000 or 8,000 hertz, depending on your particular implant, your particular insertion, whether or not it's gone all the way in. There's a lot of factors. So it is hardwired into what you have. And I'm going to take 1 second and just excuse myself because I got a patient trying to get in my front door. I'm going to let Jay take the next question and I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, Bob Lohr, you're up. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself, Bob. Unmute yourself.
Hello, Bob, are you there?
Bob, please. Okay, there
we
you go.
You're hearing Bob, but Bob is an old friend. I'm happy to have you here.
I'm Bob Lower. I have a question. Brad talked about, the interest must be made to the manufacturers or the companies and then to the audiologists. There have been several commercials running late at night here in Los Angeles about, they show a couple and one of the couple can't hear the TV or they can't hear across the dinner table, and they present a hearing piece that they use apparently, and at the end of the commercial, it solves the problem and it gives you the phone number, how to order it, etc. Does that mean that somebody contact manufacturer saying this may be a problem and this is something we could look into and develop whatever earpiece this is? I don't think it's Bluetooth. I'm not really quite sure. I didn't have a chance to pull up the commercial while I was watching, but has the interest in developing earpieces for the general public. I assume they didn't go to an audiologist, something that you see on the commercial, hey, that may help, and then you go buy it. Any idea if the interest is already out there, as small as it can be, to get this company to develop
Bob, I think you're really out of time here, so please wrap it up.
Yeah, okay, so the reality is that everybody knows that everybody who makes gadgets knows that people over the age of around 65 or 70 potentially don't hear as well as they used to. And the people who make televisions, there's been a working group for many, many years trying to fine tune capabilities on TV for people. So there's a lot of, anybody who makes a gizmo that makes things louder knows that there's a market potentially for people who don't hear well. So that didn't really come from a particular person who said, hey, I don't hear the TV well, make me a gizmo. That is a small piece of the consumer electronics industry that I think has already figured out that making TV louder will help some people. So I don't think it came from audiologists. I don't think it came from consumers. It just came from people who are making radios or whatever, and they looked around and they said, we need to sell a new product. Where do people have a problem? And they did some market research, and I do some consulting for people who are looking at ways to invest money and make money. And when you look at people over the age of 65, you say, oh, they need, they have diabetes, so let's make a diabetes thing. They have hearing problems, let's make a hearing problem. They have eyeglasses, let's make eyeglasses. So that's already out there. I don't think it came from anybody specifically. And there's about 100 of those little TV gizmos.
Thank you, Brad. Okay, we're about out of time here, and I would like to thank Jay and Brad for this wonderful presentation. Also like to thank board member David Landsberger for being our Zoom host and running the videos and the polls. And as always, thank you to our captioner, Lauren Schechter. We're very fortunate to have her. We continue to see many new faces tonight. To learn more about HLAA, to join or to donate to help us continue our activities, please go to the chapter website, hearinglossnyc.org. 2 weeks ago, some of you may have been with us, we enjoyed a great day in the park for our annual Walk for Hearing. However, donations to the walk were far below the levels of previous years, despite the enormous total of $9,735 raised single-handedly by Ann Pope. It has been disappointing that so few of our members contribute to the chapter. The total amount is, of course, important, but only 40% of that comes to the chapter. But one of the measures of success of a fundraising drive is the participation rate. When very few people contribute, it appears that the organization's activities are not valued. If you attend our programs and find them helpful, even if you're not in New York City, Please consider donating to our chapter by visiting our website, which I will mention again, is hearinglossnyc.org. Contributions of any size would be appreciated. Our next meeting will be 4 weeks from now on November 2nd, and will focus on smartphones and how they are helpful for people with hearing loss. I hope to see all of you then. Thanks again to everybody, and good night.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to have to jump off because I've got a patient in the waiting room, but it was a pleasure to see you all and good to see some old faces and some new old faces, and anything we can do down the road, let us know. Jay has more energy than I do, so he just tags me along and lets me ride on his coattails.
Only on Zoom, only on Zoom. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I'm really appreciating all the comments. It's really, really fantastic and very gratifying. Thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jay. Bye, Brad. Good night to all.
If anyone, anyone's still there, you have the ability to save the chat and the transcript and things like that. It'd be wonderful to be able to read them later.
I've got it. I can save it for you, no problem.